When we study history, a historian cannot only go with the quote unquote the official version of events. They also have to look at the alternative sources about the same, event and see what is the reality. Because the version which is promoted by the rulers becomes more popular, and this is what we call the official version of the story. And of course, it favors the rulers and the victors. Whereas good historian has actually to look at the alternative source of those who are oppressed, the other side of the equation. We have gathered tonight to commemorate the wafat of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in the background of the perspective that I have presented to you about studying history, I would like to actually look at the last moments, the actual real, before the actual demise of Rasulullah. And even there you will see that there are two versions of it. There is one, the so-called official version of what happened. And I'm not even talking about the incident of Thursday, which I talked about it many years ago, when the Prophet asked for the paper and pen to put his repeatedly mentioned, wish about succession into written form, and that were denied. I'm not talking about Thursday event. I'm talking about the Monday, which was the day of the wafat of the Prophet. And this is where we see, when we look at the so-called official version of the story, which was promoted by the rulers of the time, you will see that is represented in Sahih Bukhari. And the narration is actually from Aisha herself. And the way she talks about the last moments and minutes of the life of the Prophet. And I'll read to you the official translation of English of Sahih Bukhari done by the Sunni translators, where she is saying, and if you pay attention to the words initially, she says, "It was one of the favors of Allah towards me that Allah's apostle expired in my house on the day of my turn." His wives had different times, and they had their own turns where the Prophet would be. And so she says, "It was one of the favors of Allah towards me that Allah's apostle expired in my house on the day of my turn, while he was leaning against my chest, and Allah made my saliva mix with his saliva at his death." Now, what does she mean by that? She's explaining further. She says, at that time, Abdurrahman came into the room, and he had a siwak. Miswak? The brush which comes from the special tree, which in the Middle East and even in South Asia, they use it for brushing their teeth. And he had this siwak in his hand, and the Prophet looked at it, and according to her, he was looking at it constantly. And so she says, I asked her, "Shall I take it for you?" And he nodded in agreement. So Aisha says, I took from Abdurrahman, and I gave it to him, but because it was very hard, and I said, "Shall I soften it for you?" And again, he nodded in approval. So she then basically used her own teeth to soften it, and then she gave it to the Prophet. This is where she, talks that my saliva was mixed with the saliva of the Prophet. And then in front of him, the narration goes on that there was a jug, a jug of water, and he started dipping his hand in the water and then rubbing his hand on his face, and he was uttering the words that there is none who deserves to be worshipped except Allah, and the death is his own agonies. While he was repeating these words, he expired and his hand dropped down. This is in Sahih Bukhari. If you look at the Arabic and English version, this is in volume 5, book number 59, hadith number 730. Now this is the version given by majority of biographers of the Prophet in the Muslim world. But as I said earlier, we have to look at the alternative sources. Is there another narration about it? And for us, an important historical source as an alternative source for our history is actually Nahjul Balagha. This sermon number 197 in Nahjul Balagha is a sermon where Amir al-Mu'mineen talks about the last moments of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And there you will see the story is completely different. He begins by saying in that khutbah, and this is a khutbah he gave when he was already recognized by the Muslims as a Khalifa. Probably this was in context of one of the battles, probably before Siffin, where he says, لَقَدْ عَلِمَ الْمُسْتَحْفَظُونَ مِنْ أَصْحَابِ مُحَمَّد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. Interestingly, first he talks about himself. And he says that those companions of the Prophet who were entrusted with his message, who were faithful in promoting the message of the Prophet, verily know that I never disobeyed Allah and his messenger at all. So he's first of all talking about his own, credibility there. And then he says, not only that I never disobeyed Allah and the Rasul at all, لَقَدْ وَاصَيْتُهُ بِنَفْسِي فِي الْمَوَاطِنِ. And not only that, but by the virtue of the courage which Allah has given to me, I supported him with my life at different occasions. الَّتِي تَنْكُسُ فِيهَا الْأَبْطَالِ. Even in situations where the brave ones stand away. And in situations where the feet would hesitate to move in that direction. But I was there supporting and protecting the Prophet in all these cases. So after talking about himself, then Ali comes to this point about the wafat of the Prophet. And he says, وَلَقَدْ قُبِضَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that the Prophet died, وَإِنَّ رَأْسُهُ لَعَلَى صَدْرِي. قُبِضَ, his soul was taken of the Prophet. إِنَّ رَأْسِهِ لَعَلَى صَدْرِي. While his head was on my chest. Not only that, وَلَقَدْ سَالَتْ نَفْسُهُ فِي كَفِّي فَعَمَرْتُهَا عَلَى وَجْهِي. He says, his last breath passed through my hand, my palms, and I actually passed them on my face. And so this Amir al-Mu'mineen is being very clear about it. There is no ambiguity in what he is saying. Very different from the version that we saw in Sahih Bukhari. But then, we will be told, well, Nahjul Balagha is not that reliable. Or this is a minority version. Is it supported by the Sunni sources? Well, alhamdulillah, it is. Although the official version is something else, but the historians and muhaddiseen of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah were not able to totally conceal this reality. You have people like Ibn Kathir, a famous historian. You have Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal in his Musnad, Hakim Nishapuri in his Mustadrak al-Sahihain, al-Mustadrak al-Sahihain. This Hakim Nishapuri was a Sunni alim where he actually gathered the ahadith which were neglected by Bukhari and Muslim, but he used the criteria used by both of them. He said, I'm just selecting the ahadith based on the criteria used by Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. And he says, I don't know why that they didn't include those ahadith in the books. So this is known as al-mustadrak al-sahihain, as an appendix to the Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. He has this. Ibn Sa'ad has a very prominent book on the history of the early Muslims, At-Tabaqat, where he quotes many narrations that the Prophet died while his head was on the shoulder of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. Let me just give you one narration from Ibn Sa'ad in his At-Tabaqat. And it seems this was an issue already, the official version was being pushed by the ruling class. But those who knew, they were already discussing this issue among themselves. You have Abdullah ibn Abbas, the cousin of the Prophet, the cousin of Ali. And this is Ibn Sa'ad, a Sunni, a writer. He quotes a narration from Abu Ghatfan. Abu Ghatfan said that I went to Abdullah ibn Abbas and I asked him about this issue. It means even those early days, people were discussing that while we hear one thing from one side, what is the reality? So he goes to Abdullah ibn Abbas and he says, because remember Abdullah ibn Abbas is a cousin of the Prophet, he is from Banu Hashim, and he is among those who was present in that room at that time. He says, did you see the Prophet at the time of the death? Was his head on anyone's lap? So Abu Ghatfan doesn't give a name, he's just asking Abdullah ibn Abbas about this. Abdullah ibn Abbas says, yes, he died while he was leaning on the chest of Ali. When Abu Ghatfan heard that, he says, but I have heard from Urwa, narrating from Aisha, that she said that the Prophet was leaning between my chest and neck at that time. Abdullah ibn Abbas says, by Allah, the Prophet died while he was leaning on the chest of Ali. It was he, Ali, who gave the funeral bath to him with my brother Fazl bin Abdullah. Salawat pranek bara. Let us go to another of the wives of the Prophet who is considered to be the wisest of all among them, and that is Salama. Salama, again, I am quoting here Al-Mustadrak of Hakim Nishapuri and Musnad of Ahmad bin Hanbal, Sunni sources. Salama says that I swear by him, in whose name I swear, referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Ali was indeed closest to the Prophet at all times. We visited the Prophet in the morning of his wafat. And when she uses the term we, she's referring to the wives of the Prophet, that we visited the Prophet in the morning while he was constantly asking, did Ali come? Did Ali come? So this is a time when Ali was not yet in the room. And they realized that the Prophet is asking for Ali. Where is he? And Fatima replied, according to Salama, that probably you have sent him for some task and he has gone there. Then Ali came in. And this is Salama saying, then Ali came in and I felt that the Prophet wanted to have some privacy. He didn't want us there. And so we left the room. Again, when she is saying we, it refers to all the azwaj and wives of the Prophet. We left the room and we sat at the door. So we went out, but we were sitting by the door and sitting closest to the door, I could see the Prophet. At that time, he leaned towards Ali on his left side and started whispering to Ali. This is what we hear in our own narrations, that, these are the last statements and the will that a Nabi would give to his successor, or the Imam would be giving to his next, successor at the time. And then Salama says that she died the Prophet died that same day, and so Ali who was closest to him of all the people. And this is actually a narration which has been supported by many other, including Al-Dhahabi, who says that this narration of Salama is considered to be a sahih and a reliable narration. Salawat Pranak Parar. And so Ali made it very clear by saying that, the Prophet died when he was leaning on my chest. And then he continues in that khutbah of Nahj al-Balagha, where he says, وَلَقَدْ وَلَّيْتُ غُسْلَهُ وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ أَعْوَانِي. Ali says, I performed his ghusl mayyit, and the angels helped me in that. زجت الدار والأفنية ملأ يحبط وملأ يعرج. He says at that time when the Prophet died and I was giving the ghusl to the Prophet and the malaika were helping me, the house and the courtyard was filled with malaika. Some of them were coming to pay their respect to the Prophet, and they would ascend again and another group will come down. And he says this continued, وَمَا فَارَقَتْ سَمْعِي حَنِيئَةٌ مِّنْهُمْ يُصَلُّونَ عَلَيْهِ حَتَّى وَارَيْنَاهُ فِي زَرِيعِهِ. He says that my ears continuously caught their humming voice of the malaika as they invoked Allah's blessing on the Prophet till we buried him in his grave. Salawat Pranak Barar. And of course, in the latter part of the event, that who gave ghusl to the Prophet, and there is no dispute about it at all. But the last minutes and the moments before the wafat is there where you see the official version and the alternative version that we have. Because we know that the ghusl was given by Ali, and after ghusl and kafan, Ali was the first one who recited Salatul Janazah, and the ghusl was given in the same room in the Prophet died, and so it was not taken out into the masjid or in the courtyard, and so there was no general namaz janazah at that time. Ali was who was handling everything, and once the ghusl and kafan was done, then Ali, after reciting namaz janazah, he would allow 7 to 10 people, because the room was not that big. He would allow them to go there, and he would say that everybody has to do namaz janazah furada, because Rasulullah imamun hayyan wa mayyitan. Rasulullah is the imam, whether he is alive or he is dead. So there will be nobody leading any, group of people in janazah. So he was actually monitoring the whole process, allowing the people. This continued on Monday after the wafat and the ghusl and kafan, Monday night also, and on Tuesday until the Prophet was buried on Tuesday. Salawat Pranak Barar. And this is where we come to realize that when we study history, you do not necessarily go with the majority version. You have to see if there is an alternative narration of that and try to see whether there is some support for that or not. And in this case, we see that even in the Sunni sources, the sources are very clear that it was Amir al-Mu'mineen who had this honor and privilege to hold the Prophet during the last moments of his life. Salawat pढ़ने का.